An Original Revenge, April 11, 2019, by W.C. Morrow, in Old Stories. On a certain day, I received a letter from a private soldier named Gretmer, attached to the garrison of San Francisco. I had known him but slightly, the acquaintance having come about through his interest in some stories which I had published, and which he had a way of calling psychological studies. He was a dreamy, romantic, fine-grained lad, proud as a tiger lily and sensitive as a bluebell. What mad caprice led him to join the army, I never knew, but I did know that there he was wretchedly out of place, and I foresaw that his rude and repellent environment would make of him in a time a deserter, or a suicide, or a murderer. The letter at first seemed a wild outpouring of despair, for it informed me that before it should reach me, its author would be dead by his own hand. But when I had read further, I understood its spirit and realized how cuneiform a seam it disclosed and how terrible its purport was intended to be. The worst of the contents was the information that a certain officer, whom he named, had driven him to be dead, and that he was committing suicide for the sole purpose of gaining thereby the power to revenge himself upon his enemy. I learned afterward that the officer had received a similar letter. This was so puzzling that I sat down to reflect upon the young man's peculiarities. He had always seemed somewhat uncanny, and had I proved more sympathetic, he doubtless would have gone farther and told me of certain problems which he professed to have solved concerning the life beyond this. One thing that he had said came back vividly. If I could only overcome the purely gross and animal love of life that makes us all shun death, I would kill myself, for I know how far more powerful I could be in spirit than in flesh. The manner of the suicide was startling, and that was what might have been expected from this odd character. Evidently scorning the flummery of funerals, he had gone into a little canyon near the military reservation and blown himself into a million fragments with a dynamite, so that all of him that was ever found was some minute particles of flesh and bone. I kept the letter a secret, for I desired to observe the officer without losing his suspicion of my purpose. It would be an admirable test of that man's power and deliberate intention to own the living. For so I interpreted the letter. The officer thus to be punished was an oldish man, short, apoplectic, overbearing, and irascible. Generally, he was kind to most of the men in a way, but he was gross and mean, and that explains sufficiently his harsh treatment of young Gretmer, whom he could not understand, and his effort to break that flaky young man's spirit. Not very long after all the suicide, certain modification in the officer's conduct became apparent to my watchful oversight. His color, though none the less sporadic, developed a quality which had some of the characteristic of senility. And yet, he was still in his prime, and past for a sound man. He was a bachelor, and had lived always alone. But presently he began to shirk solitude at night and court it in daylight. His brother officer shoved him, and thereupon he would laugh, and rather a forced and a silly fashion, quite different from the ordinary way with him, and would sometimes. On this occasion, blush so violently that his face would become almost purple. His soldierly alertness and sternness relaxed surprisingly at sometimes, and others were exaggerated into unnecessary acerbity. His conduct in this regard suggesting that a drunken man who knows that he is drunk and who now and then make a brave effort to appear sober. All these things and more indicating some mental strain or some dreadful apprehension, or perhaps something worse than either, were observed partly by me and partly by an intelligent officer, whose watch me upon the man had been secured by me. To be more particular, the afflicted man was observed often to start suddenly in alarm, look quickly round, and make some unintelligent monosyllabic answer, seemingly to an inaudible question that no visible person had asked. He acquired the reputation, too, of having taken lately to nightmares, for in the middle of the night he would shriek in the most dreadful fashion, alarming his roommate prodigiously. After this attack, he would sit up in bed, his ruddy face devoid of color, his eyes glassy and shining, his breathing broken with gasps, and his body wet with a cold perspiration. Knowledge of this development and transformation spread throughout the garrison, but the few, mostly women, who dared to express sympathy or suggest to attending encounter so violent rebuff that they blessed heaven for escaping alive from his work follies. Even the garrison surgeon, who had a kindly manner, and the commanding general, who has constructed on dignified and impressive lines, received little thanks for their solitude. Clearly, the doughty old officer, who had fought like a bulldog in 2 wars and 100 battles, was suffering deeply from some undiscoverable malady. The next extraordinary thing which he did was to visit one evening, not so clandestinely as I escaped my match. A spirit medium, extraordinary, because he always had scoff at the idea of spirit communication. I saw him as he was leaving the medium's room. His face was purple, his eyes were bulging and terrified, and he tottered in his walk. A policeman, seeing his distress, advanced to assist him, whereupon the soldier hoarsely begged, "Call a hack!" Into it he fell, and asked to be driven to his quarters. I hastily ascended to the medium's room and found her lying unconscious on the floor. Soon, with my aid, she recalled her wits, but her conscious state was even more alarming than the other. At first, she regarded me with terror and cried, "It's horrible for you to haunt him so." I assured her that I was haunting no one, and I thought you were the spear, I mean. Oh, but it was standing exactly where you are, she exclaimed. I suppose so, I agreed, but you can see that I'm not the young man's spirit. However, I'm familiar with those old cases, madam, and if I can be of any service in the matter, I should be glad if you will inform me. I'm aware that our friend is persecuted by a spirit, which visit him frequently, and I'm positive that enough it has informed him that the end is not far away, and that our elderly friends that will assume some terrible form. Is there anything that I can do to avert the tragedy? The woman stared at me in a horrified silence. How did you know this thing? She gasped. That is immaterial. When will the tragedy occur? Can I prevent it? Yes, yes, she exclaimed. It will be happen this very night, but no earthly power can prevent it. She came close to me and looked at me with an expression of the most acute terror. Merciful God, what will become of me? He is to be murdered. You understand? Murdered in a cold blood by a spirit, and he knows it, and I know it. If he spared long enough, he will tell them at the garrison, and they will all think that I had something to do with it. Oh, this is terrible, terrible. And yet I dare not to say a word in advance. Nobody there will believe in what the spirit says. And then will think that I had a hand in the murder. The woman's agony was pitiful. Be assured that he will say nothing about it, I said. And if you keep your tongue from wagging, you need fear nothing. With this and a few other hurried words of comfort, I soothed her and hastened away. For I had interesting work on hand. Is it not often that one may be in such a murder as that? I ran to a livery stable, secured a swift horse, mounted him, and spurred furiously for the reservation. The hack, with its generous start, had gone far on its way. But my horse was nimble, and his leg for the pricking of my eagerness. A few miles of the furious pursuit brought me within sight of the hag just as it was crossing a dirt ravine near the reservation. As I came near, I imagined that the leg swayed somewhat, and a flying shadow escaped from into the tree bank further wall of the ravine. I certainly was not in error with regard to the swaying, for it had roused the dull notice of the Reed River. I saw him turn, with an air of alarm in his action, and then pull up with a heavy swing upon the reins. At this moment, I dashed up and halted. Anything the matter? I asked. I don't know, he answered. Getting down, I felt the carriage sway, and I see the doors wide open. Guess my lord thought he would sober up enough to get out and walk, without troubling me or his pocketbook. Meanwhile, I too had neglected the struck a match, and by its light we discovered, through the open door, the load, handled confusedly on the floor of the hack, face upward, his chin compressed upon his breast by his leaning against the farther door, and looking altogether vulgar, misshapen, and miserably unlike a soldier. He neither moved nor spoken when we called. We hastily clambered within and lifted him upon the seat, but his head rolled about with an awful looseness and freedom, and another match disclosed a ghastly dead face and white eyes that stared horribly at nothing. You would better drive the body to headquarters, I said. Instead of following, I cantered back to town, housed my horse, and went straight away to bed. And this will prove to be the first information that I was the mysterious man on a horse whom to the coroner could never find. About a year afterward, I received the following letter, which is absurd to be in fair English from Stockholm, Sweden. Dear Sir, for some years I have been reading your remarkable psychological studies with great interest, and I take the liberty to suggest a theme for your able pen. I have just found in the library here a newspaper, dated about a year ago, in which is an account of the mysterious death of a military officer in the head. Then followed the particulars, as I have already detailed them, and the very damn of postmortem revenge which I have adopted in this setting out of fact. Some person may regard the coincidence between my correspondence suggestion and my private and exclusive knowledge as being a very remarkable thing. But there are likely even more wonderful things in the world, and at none of them do I longer marvel. More extraordinary still in his suggestion that in the dynamite explosion, a dog or a quarter of a beef might as well have been employed as a suicide-minded man. That, in short, the man might not have killed himself at all, but might have employed a presumption of such an occurrence to render more effective a physical persecution ending in murder by the living man who had posed as a spirit. The letter even suggested an arrangement with a spirit medium, and I regard that as a queer thing. The declared purpose of this letter was to suggest material for another of my psychological studies, but I submit that the whole affair is of too grave a character for treatment and the levity of fiction, and in the facts and coincidence should prove less puzzling to other than to me. A praiseworthy service might be done to humanity by the presentation of better solution, a better understanding than mine might evolve. The only remaining disclosure which I'm prepared now to make is that my correspondent signed himself Ramtar, an odd-sounding name, but for all I know it may be respectable in Sweden. And yet, there is something about the name that haunts me unceasingly, much as does some strange dream which we know we had dreamed and yet which is impossible to remember. Okay, this is the last of my short story. Thank you so much for the attention.